Should I move to the United States to double my salary? That's a question I was recently asked. And as much as we talk about the United States as being a legacy brand, we help Americans leave to go where they're treated best, you might be surprised by my answer. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist. We're the channel and the company that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. Here's a question I got here on YouTube. It says, "Hi Andrew, could you help me with an issue that I'm having? My partner and I are considering moving to the USA for 2 to 4 years for him to work at Amazon or Facebook. His salary will be almost double of that in Europe, with the exception of Switzerland. So it's a bit tempting. I'm very much aware of the chaos that is happening in the US right now, so I need your advice on this one. Thanks so much." So you might be surprised what I have to say about this. As you know, our 5 magic words here are go where you're treated best. And one of the things that I've said, I remember I had a meeting with some guys in Vanuatu a couple of years. At the time, I was in the waning years, the final year actually of my US citizenship, and they said, you have the worst situation possible. And they said, you're a US citizen who doesn't live there. You have all the obligations, and you don't even get to live there and take advantage of it. And I said that I think that the one worse scenario would be being a U.S. citizen and living there. But I said that coming from the perspective of being an entrepreneur, because to me, it's just not the best place to live, not a place that I would want to live for a long period of time. The exception to that would be if you're not an entrepreneur and you have a job. I looked at a report not that long ago that showed if each EU country was a U.S. state, I think almost all of them would be like number 47, 48, or actually most of them would be like 50. They would be at the very bottom of the list. Even the wealthiest European countries just don't really compare in terms of the salaries that people earn in most U.S. states. And so if you have an income that comes from a salary, the U.S. isn't really that bad. And that's because for all the things we talk about for salaries, compared to Europe, I mean, you're paying very low payroll taxes. You've got relatively low Social Security with a cap on it. You've got Medicare with no cap, but it's not a lot. Unemployment insurance is reasonable. I mean, you compare that, we have companies that do staffing in rather reasonable European countries, emerging European countries. Wages are lower, but taxes as a percentage are higher. And so for that and other reasons, as well as Amazon and Facebook having a big presence there, you're getting paid more. And so what I would look at in this situation is the net income. That's what matters. Now, this is an area where people say, Andrew, you can invest in the United States and you can do better. Even though you pay some taxes, it's better. There's a company in Singapore that does robo-investing, and they say, hey, even though there's some taxes to pay on the U.S. side for some of the investment stuff that we're doing, we still think it's the best place to be. That may or may not be the case. I believe if you're doing real estate investing, if you're buying REITs, if you're buying certain equities, if you're starting a company, if you're investing in whatever it may be, I think in many cases you can still be ahead of the game as an investor, net, investing outside of the United States. And you have far fewer hassles, no tax returns, no estate tax, what have you. But when it comes to a salary, net income is what matters. Now, what I would look at is if you're the partner, I don't know if that means you're married or what the deal is, and obviously that will matter in terms of immigration and all that. Are you going to be able to work? And are you working right now? And so if he's going to make a little bit more money, but you're not going to be able to work, then that's not a great deal. Now, I do know a couple people who have moved from the US, from Canada, from other places to live in Switzerland and to work at companies like Google. And they're making big money. I mean, $500,000 a year, 600,000, 700,000 Swiss francs. And I would imagine that's on par with what you'd have in the U.S. So I would go and say, I don't think their tax situation is any worse. In fact, I think for some of them it was actually better than living in the U.S. and living in California. And so I would say, why isn't Switzerland an option? You said that the salaries are higher in the U.S. than they are in Europe, except for Switzerland. Why not consider Switzerland? Why isn't that an option? Because I know people who've gone there, and so it is possible. And so that aside, I would say net income is what matters. If I could get a similar net income in Switzerland, I would probably go to Switzerland because I imagine the benefit that some people would consider of the U.S. versus Switzerland is becoming a Swiss citizen is quite difficult. Being a U.S. citizen is hardly a walk in the park, but it's much faster in comparison. And so somebody who's coming from India, for example. I don't know where this person is from, but if someone's from India or China or a country that just doesn't have a very strong passport, the lure of the U.S. passport, it just seems much more achievable. I think someone in that situation, sees Silicon Valley, all these great companies. I can live in California. I can be an American. It seems more attainable perhaps than being Swiss. Or perhaps, especially if you're from a country like India or China, you'd have a hard time being naturalized in Switzerland. I don't think you would in the U.S. But as you know, from our perspective here, the U.S. passport is one you probably don't want. And especially if you have a passport that's even halfway decent, I would not want to move there. I would go there and, if I'm going to be on a green card, I would go there and avoid being a long-term green card holder. I would keep my tenure to a reasonable period of time. And I would leave before I got in the same boat as an American. And so that's the first thing I would look at is net income is what matters. Can you as the spouse work? The other thing is there is a lifestyle benefit. If you offered me money to go back and live in the U.S., I generally would not take it. Now, there are days where I live other places and I get frustrated, but I would not take the money. And so if you said, listen, it's zero tax, I don't think I would do it for any length of time. If you want to live there, that's fine. And that's going to make it easier to do with all the stuff that if you're a green card holder, the bank accounts where you live now are going to have to be reported. Certain investments you have are going to have to be reported. I don't know where you're from. If you're from a European country, heck, they might even close your bank account. If you have a home back in your home country, you may have to sell it, or you may have your mortgage called if they don't let you keep a mortgage. I mean, there's all kinds of things that having U.S. taxpayer status could do. And certainly, if you have trusts, if you have companies, if you have bank accounts somewhere else, those are going to have to be reported. You're going to have to do some tax planning to move in. If you have any kind of significant assets, you're going to want to do some tax planning before you arrive. I've seen people make that mistake where they leave and they didn't do the tax planning on the way in. So if you like the idea of living there, one thing people tell me is they like going to the U.S. because it is a big country compared to, let's say, a Switzerland, where you're in Europe, but compared to, let's say, a Singapore, there's not so many places to go. The U.S. obviously you've got a big country to explore, and some people I know who have gone to work there from European countries, Canada, what have you, they like the idea of, you spend 4 or 5 years, you're not going to get sucked into the full tax net when you leave. And you get to explore this huge country, and you can cross it off the list. I've done that. But if you don't want to live there, if it's just like, hey, I'm making a few more bucks, I would explore other options. What I would also say is, what experience can you gain? Could you do something remotely? Could you do freelance work? Could you start your own company? Is there some other opportunity? Obviously, and Robert Kiyosaki spoke at our conference, Nomad Capitalist, live this year. And, I saw him on social media today saying, hey, the American dream is still alive, but not if you're coming in as an employee. And so, to go to the U.S. and be an employee, you will be well paid. If you're living in California, the tax is going to be ridiculous. You're going to have to deal with all the problems that California has right now. And so I think you've got to be pretty committed to wanting to live in the U.S. to do that. And you're going to have a bigger commitment in terms of the paperwork, the bureaucracy, what have you. If you're getting paid substantially more, if you like the idea of being there, I would do it. But I would ask myself, what are the alternatives? It's not a matter of living in Belgium, for example, where I've known people who, I met a woman who was in real estate and had worked at a Big Four tax firm. And she said, my biggest salary net at the Big Four tax firm was barely 2,000 euros because rentals there were not so expensive. And she said, they pay me 5,000, I get 2,000, something like that. And the taxes are just outrageous. You don't make that much money. But it's not a matter of just that or the U.S. Put Switzerland on the table. Can you use the talents? Can you start a company? What can you do to where you don't have to go to a place that you may not want to go? There's something wrong with going to the U.S. and, if you have a salary job, maybe you don't have 10 bank accounts around the world that have to be reported. Maybe you don't have a company or a trust. Maybe it's much easier. You work with an international U.S. accountant, someone who has international experience. Don't work with a domestic accountant. If you're coming from internationally, you need an international U.S. accountant. Not one of these little guys who just fills out the forms either. You need someone for some planning. We do this kind of stuff at Nomad Capitalist with some of our accountants and tax lawyers, but you need someone professional to help you arrive if you're going there. If you're willing to put up with all of that and the money is significantly better and there's no other option, then I would do it for a limited period of time. I would get the experience. I would put it on my resume. I would enjoy being able to explore different parts of the U.S., the national parks, or wherever it is that you want to see. But I wouldn't make it something full-time. And I would be doing it with the idea that I'm going to be building up my connections to do something bigger after a tenure there once I leave the U.S. again. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.